In today's video, we're going to be learning how to model these different shapes using curves and also how to create this neon effect that travels around the curves. We'll also be learning how to create a seamless background. So let's start right off. In the default scene, let's get rid of the default cube by tapping X and deleting it. Then you could use any curve to do this, but we're going to be using the curve circle in order to make things faster. So you can hit 7 to go into the top view and then zoom in. Now with the curve selected, you can tab to go into the edit mode. Now you have each handle that can be moved and the curve changes along with that. So let's select the two opposite handles, and because we selected circle, the curve is always going to be closed. So if we hit X and delete the vertices, now we get a loop with only two handles. Now we can take one of the handles, rotate it on the X-axis by 180 degrees, and immediately we get the actual lemniscate, which is the infinity symbol. We can scale it on the Y-axis to change the shape a bit, or the X-axis according to what your preferences are. Now, it looks very jagged, and in order to get this to be much smoother, we can go to the curve properties over here and change the resolution to something like 100 to make it very smooth. Now we can't apply any texture to this until or unless it has some thickness. So in order to do that, let's go to the geometry and then under the bevel section, increase the depth by a little bit, and you immediately see that it now has some 3D texture to it. Now this was how to create the infinity symbol. If you want to create something else, like maybe a heart, we'll take another example. So let's just grab this, move it away on the x-axis, and now let's create a heart. So Shift A, curve, we can add in yet again a circle, then tab, and this time let's take this handle, grab it on the y-axis and just bring it down to the origin, and then take these two, grab it on the y-axis and just bring them up a bit. Now let's take this and just scale it down to 0. Then let's take this and also scale it down to 0. Now you can change the shapes of this. Maybe you could scale this up by scaling it to 1.5, and maybe this one as well, you can scale it to 1.5, and this maybe you could move it up a bit. So just GY and just bring it up, and there you go. Now you have a heart shape as well. GX to move it away to this side, and then give it some thickness as well. So under the bevel, just increase the depth to 1. Furthermore, we'd also have to increase the resolution, again to something like 100 to make it nice and smooth. So now we have an infinity symbol and a heart symbol. Let's increase the size of the infinity symbol by just scaling and then just dragging it up. Now we have to actually deal with the texture of these. So let's go into the rendered view and then change the background all the way to black for now so that we can see the bloom effect happen nicely. Then we can switch on bloom by going into the output properties or the render properties and switching on bloom. Then we can go ahead and bring our cursor to the joint of two windows, click and drag to open a new window. Now let's change the window to shader editor. Tap N to remove this and first add in a new material for the infinity. So click new, and there we have a new material. Now the way we get the trail to move along the actual curve is by using the UV coordinates of this particular object. So let's search for a texture coordinate node and then figure out the x coordinate of the UV. So to get just the x coordinates of the UV, we're going to have to search for a separate XYZ and then plug the UV into the vector. So now we've separated the XYZ and we're going to have to use the x coordinate to drive another texture. So for this, we're going to be using the wave texture. So once you have the wave texture, you can take the x coordinate and plug that into the vector. Now when you Control Shift click the wave texture, you can see how the texture actually looks. Now right now, there's two problems that we face. One is that the darkest areas are small, whereas we want the lightest areas to be small. Secondly, the fade is happening on both the directions equally. We want it to be very sharp on one side and gradual decline on the other. So in order to change the type of shading, we can change this from sine to saw, and immediately you'll see it goes very bright and gradually decreases to the other end. Secondly, we want this to actually move and we want the fall off to be controlled by us. So we can actually change the scaling a bit, and then we can add in a color ramp by Control A, color ramp, and plugging that in right over here. Once we have the color ramp in, we can actually control it by just moving this around a little bit here and there. Next, we'd want this to act as our emission. So let's switch this to the emission strength. Secondly, we don't want the black areas to be seen at all as a part of the mesh. We want it to be transparent. So we're going to have to go to the material properties and change the blend mode from opaque to alpha blend. Just make sure that this is ticked, otherwise we get some sort of artifacts, as you can see right over here. So this overlap shows some artifact. So if we can actually tick that show backface, then we remove that artifact. So now we can take this value itself and plug that into the alpha. So now that it's plugged into the alpha, we have to actually show the principal BSDF. So Control Shift click principal BSDF. Remember that Control Shift click to view the nodes is a part of the Node Wrangler add-on. And in case you don't have the Node Wrangler add-on switched on, you have to go to Edit Preferences and then search for the Node Wrangler and then just make sure it's checked. So now that you have the principal BSDF connected, you can see how it becomes clear and transparent in those regions. So now the next thing is the emission strength is clearly not enough and the emission value is also black. So let's increase this and give it a nice color. So maybe for infinity, we're going to use this blue color. And now we want the emission to actually be a lot stronger. So in order to do that, let's add in a math node and plug that in right here in the emission strength. Instead of add, let's switch this to multiply. Once it's done, we can actually increase the value and see how we get a nice multiplied version. But the multiplication actually gives it a nice smooth fall off, but it's not as much of a gradient as it could if you change this from multiply to power. So now, since this is now exponential, there will be a nice exponential fade off in the actual strength. And we can in fact plug this value into the alpha as well. So now you can see you get a control over the actual fade off that you get. And if you want this to now be even stronger, now you can add in a multiply node. There, so now as you multiply the value, you can get really nice bright lights. So now let's actually change the position of this by adding some value to the x coordinates. So let's search for a map node, make sure it's set to add and plug it in. Now this value is what's going to control how the lights move along the surface of the curve. So as you can see, as we move the value, all of the trails actually move. So to get that, we can keyframe the value, but to get more control, we can actually search for a value node and also a math node. Let's just Shift D this and change this from add to divide. Let's divide it by some high value like 100 so that we get a lot of control. Plug this in and plug this in over here. So now as we change the value over here, the lines actually move. Now the next thing you might notice is that since the UV map starts from here, there's a little bit of clipping that happens in that particular region. So in order to fix that, you can go ahead and change the scale of the wave texture till that is no longer an issue. And now it no longer is an issue. Finally, we can create this and make this into a perfect loop by going to frame number 0, finding a value for this, let's say a value of 0, hit I, and then just remember how this looks. Go to frame 300. Let's say that this is going to be maybe not 300. Let's make it a 5-second animation. So 150 at 30 frames per second. So go to the output properties and change the frame rate to 30 frames per second. And then at frame 150, change the value till you get the exact same again. So something like this maybe, or let's go a few more frames front. Let's go here, hit I, and now you can just use the up and down arrow keys to see if they're the same, and clearly they're not the same. This one is a little bit behind what's there at the front, so we want these two to be the exact same. So let's just shift this a little bit. So now you see it's perfectly the same when you hit the up and down arrow keys, which means it's going to be a perfect loop. So now when you play it, you get a perfect loop. But right now the interpolation is set to Bezier. We don't want it to be Bezier, we want it to be linear. So with both the keyframes selected, hit T and change it to linear. So now it's going to be a perfect loop going in the infinity symbol. In case you want this to be faster, you can always just take this and just grab it and then just move it down to maybe half its length so that it becomes, or maybe go to 90 so that it's just 3 seconds long and it takes 3 seconds to go through the perfect loop. In that case, you'd also have to change the end to 90 as well. So now you have a perfect loop for the lemniscate. Similarly, if you wanted to do something for the heart, you can go ahead and give the heart the same material and then just hit this duplicate material so that it becomes its own new material. And now you can just change the color to something that suits the heart more. let's say maybe a pink. There we go. And the scaling seems to be all right for it to already be looping. So it's already perfectly looping, but sometimes the shapes are going to change such that there's a clip happening somewhere. If that is the case, then you'd have to go ahead and change the values of the scaling over here as well. And sometimes when you change the scaling, you'll have to change the value over here for the loop to occur. But in our case, it was perfect, so we don't have to worry that much. And that is how you can create neon shapes for anything. You can always take this, Shift D, and then just scale it up so that you get another version. Here, you can create this into its own material and just increase the phase offset over here by a little bit so that it doesn't look like it's just a bigger version of the exact same thing. Just change the offset some more, something like this. There you go. And you can just Shift D that again, scale it up again, take this infinity, GX, and just move it away. And there you have it. So you can actually do a lot of cool things with this particular setup and create a lot of variations. However, you'd also require a background. So let's just go to 0 to get our camera view. Select our camera. So let's switch on overlays. Select our camera, Alt G, Alt R, then GZ, bring it back up. Then let's change the actual resolution in our output properties to a vertical aspect ratio of 1080 and 1920. Then let's take this, let's grab this out for now. Let's take our three hearts, grab it on the x-axis, and just bring them in. Let's Alt G. Now switch off overlays, and this is what our heart currently looks like. Maybe give this also the new material 3, so that it is perfectly in sync. Now in order to get a background, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the world properties, switch this from object to world, and then create a seamlessly looping background as well. So in order to do that, let's first add in a wave texture, place this into the color so that we can actually see it. And now we're going to also select the camera, just go to the passport out, or however you pronounce that, and just increase that to 1 so that we don't get disturbed or distracted. Then switch off the overlays. Now in this wave texture, see exactly how it is. Again, go to frame 0, hit I, and then go to frame 90 and just increase it till the next wave comes in and we get the exact same situation again. So approximately here, hit I. So now again, you can hit the up and down arrow keys to make sure that there isn't any motion. There's a very small motion, but I think that's fine for a background. Now let's take a Voronoi texture and just plug the color into the vector. And now when you actually play this, you see the Voronoi texture changes accordingly as a perfect loop. Of course, select this and just make sure that the interpolation is linear. Then we can scale the Voronoi texture up a bit, and we can change the colors of the Voronoi texture by placing it into a color ramp right here. So let's take the color ramp and switch the colors. Let's take this and make this a nice dark pink, and there we go. Now you could render that out to get this particular heart animation, or you could switch this to a nice dark blue and then take these hearts, just hide them, select the Bezier circle, which is our original infinity, Alt G to get that in here, scale it up, and then maybe render this out. So it's all up to your own personal preference to see what you like, and hopefully you can use this technique to render out various cool animations. I hope you learned something from this video, and I hope you can try something out. Until next time, stay creative.